So welcome everyone, and welcome to all of you in the balcony, and to those of you on video or YouTube, and a particular warm welcome to newcomers. So we're glad to have you here. Before I begin, as Janet mentioned, we are fortunate to have Jamal Rahman, the Sufi friend and colleague of ours, coming here, I think 2 weeks from today. And then 5 days later, this didn't quite make it into the announcements because we've just made these final arrangements. We have another young religious leader, Matthew Wright, coming from New York. He's actually going to be on Victoria Island, and we found out, so we invited him to come and speak here. And he will speak on the universal practices of the heart across the Christian and Sufi and Hindu traditions. And Matthew is a truly gifted and inspiring young religious leader. I think he's 32 years old. And Cynthia and I both feel he's one of the most remarkable emerging young spiritual leaders of America. So we're very fortunate to have him. It's Friday evening because he's flying back on Saturday. No, he's flying back that night, actually. So, but he will be here with us Friday, September 27th from 6:30 to 8:30. So please join us if you can. So the religious traditions of humanity are a profound spiritual treasure. Every religion brings its unique revelation and practices and constitutes an entire sacred world unto itself, whole and complete. At Unity, we recognize this rich diversity. Each major religion is a revelation and gift from God, and each religion is therefore a unique pathway to truth, which leads back to God. God has given to humanity these sacred wisdom traditions, revealed to different human communities at different times, in different parts of the world, using different languages and different cultural contexts, to show us how to live in loving service, and most especially to guide us back to God. At Unity, we honor the sacred unity at the core of all religions, and we also celebrate their diversity. This communion of religious traditions is needed today now more than ever. As Christ said, "Wherever 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am also." And I would suggest that this divine promise from Christ applies not only to gatherings of individuals in worship, but also at another level, to the gathering of entire religious and spiritual traditions themselves. The Spirit of God, or the universal Christ consciousness, is present wherever people gather in the name of the Supreme, regardless of what name they give to God. One of the greatest inner spiritual pioneers in modern history, Raymond Panikkar, wrote prolifically about this in his 40 books. Panikkar was a Catholic priest who died just a couple years ago, and a professor who split his time between the West and India, probing the spiritual depths of the major religions. As he put it, "I left Europe as a Christian, went to India, and discovered I was a Hindu, and eventually returned as a Buddhist, all without ever ceasing to be Christian." So this is the essence of what is called multiple religious belonging. In Panikkar's book, in one of his books, entitled Christophany, which means Epiphany of Christ, he says, Christians do not have a monopoly on knowledge of Christ. Christ is the Christian symbol for the whole of reality. Other religions give different names to this same reality. And in short, he says, Jesus is Christ, but Christ cannot be identified completely with Jesus. In other words, Christ is not Jesus' last name. Christ is the eternal prophetic consciousness and salvation. Paramahansa Yogananda, author of the famous book, Autobiography of a Yogi, makes this same point. And he says, not the body of Jesus, but the Christ consciousness within it is the eternal Redeemer. So this non-reciprocal identity of Jesus in Christ gives us an important clue to the spiritual unity of all religions. Jesus is fully Christ, but Christ is not limited to Jesus of Nazareth. Siddhartha Gautama is fully Buddha, but Buddha is not limited to Siddhartha. In saying this, I do not in any way diminish the profound and utterly unique ministry of Jesus or of the Buddha. It is rather to recognize the eternal and universal Christ principle, which became fully embodied in Jesus of Nazareth, yet also extends well beyond him and beyond his historical person. Jesus himself affirms this in his saying, "Before Abraham was, I am." This I am never is not. Christ is. Christ is now as Christ was then, as Christ will be eternally. Christ is fully alive here and now. The universal Christ consciousness is found in different forms and names in all religions. Jesus spoke from this eternal I am when he declared, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto God except through me." In this way, we can glimpse the profound spiritual oneness that all the greatest spiritual masters of humanity have attained. We also realize through the world religions that every one of us is called in our own way to become a Christ, a Buddha, a Krishna, in our own highest spiritual destiny. It is neither blasphemy nor spiritual hubris to affirm this. It is actually the good news that all the great spiritual teachers came to teach us. Indeed, the true spiritual destiny of every sincere seeker is to realize our oneness with the universal being we call God. I have a friend who's a much beloved professor of law and social justice. And when he was a young boy, he was raised in a traditional conservative Baptist, I believe, Christian church. And every day, the family went to church and they sat there, and the preacher gave his sermon and gave the traditional Christian doctrine. And at the end, the preacher would say, "Are there any questions?" And there was silence. And then everybody went home. And then same thing happened next Sunday. So this went on, and this young boy was receiving all of these teachings and absorbing it. And one day, at the end of his sermon, the preacher said, "Are there any questions?" And this hand shot up from the back, this 11-year-old boy. And everyone was shocked. Nobody ever asks any questions. And we have a little boy asking questions. And the preacher said, "Oh, yes, young man. Stand up, stand up. What is your question?" And this 11-year-old boy stood up and he said, "Is it really true that all those people in China and Africa and India who've never even heard of Jesus are going to go to hell?" And the priest became very morose, because here he's having to speak the truth to this 11-year-old boy. And he said, "Yes, son, I'm sorry. It's a very sad state of affairs, but it is the truth." And the boy said, "Then I am not a Christian." And there was a gasp as the whole congregation shrunk back in horror, and pin-drop silence as the boy's parents tried to shrink in their seats and disappear out of their shame and humiliation. How could we have ever raised such an unbeliever in our own family? The boy's father did not speak to him for 5 years. Had nothing to do with him for 5 years. And when he was 18, he moved to India. He lived in Tiruvannamalai, which is where the great ashram of Sri Ramana Maharshi is located. He lived there for a couple years. He practiced in that tradition, which is the tradition of self-inquiry. And then he also learned Buddhist meditation and integrated these different spiritual practices. So he's kind of an interspiritual mystic and has a strong meditation practice. And maybe 8 or 10 years ago, he told me this story. He went home to visit because, eventually he made up with his family. They realized, okay, he's not a Christian, but he seems a pretty good guy. He's doing all these good things, and we still love him. And they kind of got over it all, sort of. But when he was in his late 40s, he was visiting one day for holidays, Christmas time, and his father took him aside and he said, "Son, I know you're not a Christian, but I have to tell you this. You are the most Christ-like human being I have ever met." So Christ is not limited to Christians. The redeeming power of God, or the absolute, is found in all major religions. As Meister Eckhart said, all spiritual things include each other. All material things exclude each other. So we must be very cautious not to take a material view of the spiritual world, because in that view, all things exclude each other. To regard the religions as incommensurably separate and distinct is to view them through a merely theological lens, or worse, a material lens alone. On the contrary, as the Sufi scholar Reza Shah Kazemi says, that which unites the religions is of infinitely greater value than that which differentiates the religions. What unites the religions is belief in a divine absolute of some form and a relationship to that absolute that is revealed by that absolute to humanity. The unity of religions does not mean uniformity, however. This is very important. On the contrary, diversity in form and expression are the very nature and indeed the richness of the different spiritual treasures of the different religious revelations. Together, the religions form the body of human spiritual consciousness. Different religions can be viewed by analogy to the different organs in the body. Just as the physical body requires the heart, the brain, the lungs, the liver, and the healthy interaction of all these organs in order to live, so too the body of spiritual consciousness thrives when the unique function and contribution from each religion takes its place in harmonious concert with the others. Now imagine organ exclusivism. So let's suppose that the heart became a fundamentalist organ in the body and demanded and proclaimed, "I am the supreme organ, and all of you must also be hearts. And you must convert to becoming a heart now." If the brain and lungs and liver all became hearts, that body would die. Same if the organs became livers or brains. So no one organ can impose its nature on the others. We need all of these organs, and we need the diversity and gifts and uniqueness of each in order to thrive. The different organs were created by God and placed in the body for a specific purpose. In this same way, the different religions are essential to the healthy functioning of the spiritual body of human consciousness. Each religion was revealed by God to a particular people in a unique era and place, and taken together, the religions bring vitality and health to the collective spiritual consciousness of humanity. Now let me just interject here briefly. I recognize that all the religions also have a very significant shadow side, and there has been much injustice that's been wrought through the realm of religion. We all know this. I'm choosing not to focus on that because there is so much focus on it in the society, and because there's a danger of throwing out the baby with the bathwater in this widespread rejection of religion. It's understandable, but it is very dangerous because the religions actually embody these sacred technologies for transforming the human being into an instrument of divine love, divine will, divine consciousness. So I like to, instead of focusing on the dumbest and dimmest things that have happened in religion, I like to focus on the best and the brightest, and really to retain that sacred unity across that lives as the core of all the religions. Because this diversity in human communities, whether it's religion, race, gender, whatever, is ordained by God. The rich complexity of the human family is not merely an accident of anthropology, evolution, or social construct. This is specifically emphasized in the Quran, which says, "For each human civilization and epoch, God appointed a law and a way. Had God willed, he could have made humanity all one single community. But God willed otherwise, in order to test humanity by means of what God has vouchsafed to us." So the diversity of religions is divinely ordained. So another little story here that Jack Kornfield tells. So one of his students came from a Christian background and became a Buddhist and was practicing Vipassana meditation and following the whole Buddhist path. And when her family learned of this, they were also just absolutely horrified. And they could not believe. They wondered, what did we do wrong that our daughter has gone off to some ridiculous Eastern heathen heresy instead of the great Christian, path that is the only true path. So she had a lot of conflict with her family for a couple years, trying to defend herself, trying to explain what she was doing. And she finally kind of abandoned that whole agenda. And she decided to just practice the principles of compassion, of awareness, to work with the Four Noble Truths, to do her inner work. And over time, things were healed with her family, and she was able to get along. And actually, it became a subject that was never talked about, or only rarely talked about. And when it was talked about, it again created significant tension and conflict. And she realized it all came down to this. My family despises me when I'm a Buddhist, but they love me when I'm a Buddha. And so she just forgot the Buddhism and just practiced being a Buddha. So as we see from this story, religious differences are dwarfed by their deeper common ground. This was also the surprising discovery made by Father Thomas Keating and the other religious leaders who convened in the Snowmass Conference. This was a dialogue of religious leaders from across all of the major religions that Thomas Keating convened for 32 years at his monastery in Snowmass. And the reason he did it was because he had been to so many interfaith conferences, and he found that they were boring and dull, except for the meals and the breaks. Because during the meals and the breaks, he could actually connect with other religious leaders from other traditions. And so he convened this conference to have only meals, breaks, prayers, and conversations. No presentations, like I'm doing now. So they had these conferences, and what they found, to their immense surprise and delight, was they found a tremendous amount of common ground. And they developed actually 8 points of agreement of their common ground across the religions. And they became good friends in the process. And having done that, they then began to address their differences. And to their even greater surprise and delight, they found that they bonded even more over their differences than they had over their common ground, because they discovered that these religious differences were a great gift of insight and mutual learning. And they experienced the divine diversity of the world religions together. And each one felt like it enriched their own commitment to their own tradition. So I feel this is a very important kind of in microcosm example of what now needs to happen on a larger scale, really on a global scale. So, traditional interfaith dialogue is largely comparative theology and comparative liturgy. In contrast, interspirituality, this new term, focuses more on the shared spiritual journey and the sharing of spiritual practices, meeting in the space of the heart. The sacred unity of the traditions can be discovered. And the transformative journey of the soul is revealed to be very similar across the different religions. And in that, they are revealed to be very much similar. And a profound ground of unity becomes self-evident. Now, the heart is the seat of spiritual vision, which we can perceive this unity through the heart. According to St. Bonaventure and Hugh of St. Victor, the human being is endowed with a triple eye. We have the eye of the flesh, which are these two eyes, the eye of reason, which is the mind, and the eye of the heart, which is the organ of spiritual vision. And our physical eyes see the elements of the physical world. Our eye of reason sees the world of the mind, logic and concepts. And the eye of spirit, or the eye of heart, sees divine things and ultimately is enabled to see God when purified. So through prayer, faith, purification, and divine grace, the spiritual eye is opened. Now, each of these eyes sees successively further than the lower eye can see. So, for example, the eye of reason can perceive concepts and figure things out that the eye of the flesh does not see. A simple example of this would be the sun. The sun rises every morning in the east, moves across the sky, sets in the west. The earth is perfectly still, as we can all feel. It's not moving at all, right? So the earth is stationary and the sun goes around the earth. Nothing could be more self-evident. And this is the evidence and the testimony of the eyes of the flesh. Now we know that by application of reason and much more refined conceptual thinking, we figured out, Copernicus figured out, and others actually before him, that that isn't what happens at all. We know that that geocentric cosmology that Ptolemy developed based on the earth being the center of the universe and everything revolving around it is utterly mistaken. But it stood for nearly 2,000 years. Why is that? Because it accurately predicted many things. It predicted the phases of the moon. It predicted the motions and the periodicities of the planet. All of these things, of the planets, all of these things were accurately predicted by this wrong theory. That's an important insight into science. Wrong theories can give right results and correct predictions. That's not my main point, but that is a good point. My main point in bringing up this high school science lesson is to point to the fact that just as the eye of reason can contradict and override what the eyes of the flesh see, so too the eye of the heart can contradict and override what the eye of reason can see. And this is really important because the heart can see further than the mind. This is the key. And this is sadly one of the great blind spots in our current Western civilization, which is so totally enamored of science, appropriately so, but has sort of lost the eye of the spirit, the eye of the heart, because of this total focus on the eye of the mind, the eye of the reason. So this is, there is a deeper truth revealed by the eyes of the heart, and this is the way in which we can acquire and develop the spiritual vision. Now, how is this spiritual vision developed? Jesus tells us very simply and very clearly in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God." And that summarizes the essence of it. Blessed are the pure of heart. So it's a purity of heart that enables us to have this spiritual vision. And without it, we are blinded to it. And in fact, the traditions prevent our seeing it. So, for example, Jesus said, "This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand." Similarly, we see similar passages in the Quran and also in the Bhagavad Gita. God, in the form of Krishna, after his disciple Arjuna has gone through sufficient purification practices, finally then God gives Arjuna spiritual vision in order that he may see God. So this is a required journey that we have to take, the journey of the heart, in order to cleanse the eye of the heart, so that we can actually acquire this spiritual vision. This eye of the heart sees beyond the apparent separation. So for example, all of us sitting here, the one who is speaking right now and the one who is listening right now are the same one. One being, many bodies. One flame. So we are one being, one supreme light. The one who looks out from me and the one who looks out from you are the same one. So spiritual vision is a light that sees but cannot be seen. It is what enables us to see, but it itself cannot be seen, which is why it is invisible to the mind. So finally, what exactly is this unity, this oneness at the core of all the religions? What is its essence and its nature? The bottom line is this. Each religion affirms an absolute, which is given different names such as God, Allah, Brahma. And from this absolute, a revelation is given to humanity. And the universal truth of all these revelations is this simple truth. The inmost essence of the human being is none other than the transcendent essence of the absolute, or of God. And this is expressed in the principle, we are made in the image of God. Or we might say, we are made of the essence of God. We are this very essence. So let us close with a prayer. First from Jesus in his prayer in chapter 17 of John's Gospel, where he says, Father, I pray not for these only, but for all those who believe in me through their word, that they may be one, as you, God, are in me, and I am in you. May they also be one in us, so the world may believe that you have given them the glory you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Dear Lord, we ask that you purify our hearts and give us the strength and courage to walk the path of divine love and service to you. We offer ourselves in devotion. We ask these things in order that we may realize our highest spiritual destiny and live this oneness with you in truth. Amen.